Hey everyone, this is Dr. Matt from the Ethos Athletes Podcast, coming to you from Ethos Integrative Medicine in Scottdale, Arizona. This is the start of our nutrition series where we're going to be talking about nutrition for performance, weight loss, and everything else. And with that, I have a special guest, Kelli Michelle from Keep Moving Forward. Kelli holds a master's in nutrition science from ASU. She has a NASM certification, and she's a sports nutrition specialist. Kelli, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
So with this very first episode, we're going to be talking about some basics of nutrition and some frequently asked questions that not only I get, but that Kelli gets as well. Here in my office, as you know, I do sports medicine and men's health, and I constantly have people ask me the nutrition questions, especially a lot of my CrossFit athletes. And so instead of taking the time to answer them, I figured I'd go to someone that deals with it all the time, and so that's why I brought Kelli in. So Kelli, let's start out. What are some of the common goals that some of your clients are wanting to achieve?
Okay, so if we're speaking specifically about athletic performance, which is about 15 to 20% of the population that I work with, I do also work with a lot of CrossFit clients. Primarily, I would say out of that 15 to 20% of my total population, 70% of those are CrossFitters. And the CrossFitter is a delicate situation. So they come to you, and normally their prime focus is athletic performance, which macro tracking is the method that I use. So tracking where they are getting their calories from as far as fat, carb, and protein intake. That is what makes up their calories for the day. So it's a very, very difficult situation for each person because there's so many variables that each CrossFitter has. Some people train twice a day. Some people have a couple 2-a-day workouts per week. Some are competitive CrossFitters where other CrossFit athletes just simply go to the gym and do the prescribed workouts every day. So there's really some variables that differ. One of those is fat loss. So if the CrossFitter is coming and they are really focused on performance, in the beginning, I have to look at their equation and I have to fix some of the variables that are keeping us from getting them into a fat loss position. Typically, what I'll do is work on getting their performance nutrition at a place where their percentages look really good and they're feeling good. And then I can lower those when we're not in a season with the open or regionals. We're past the games and maybe into a period where I can put them in a slight calorie deficit because their training is not as intense. So that's one of the big issues with CrossFit is that sometimes they come in thinking that they can have everything all at once. And that's not necessarily the case based off of where they start and where they plan to go. And it really is kind of dependent on what their year looks like as far as training.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to make. A lot of people come in wanting, everything to happen all at once, and it's important for people to recognize that that's a step-by-step process.
Sure. Yeah, and a lot of the CrossFit athletes are no different from normal Gen Pop, where they come to you and, maybe they've had a great week of eating, and on the weekend, they actually eat what their body says it needs. So in order to do that, it would, force them to have a quote-unquote cheat day or a binge day or a day where maybe they consume more calories, and then the next day they do the same because the body's satisfied and now it wants those calories again. Because they're eating under their maintenance level calories throughout the week, maybe by eating too clean or not eating enough for their expenditure. So what I do in that first 2-month period is really just focus on taking them from where their current calorie intake was when I do their 7-day initial tracking, and then move them towards percentages and ratios that are a little bit better for sport performance, overall performance. And then if I know that their long-term goal is fat loss or that their short-term goal is fat loss, and they're in a place where I can actually move those ratios around, percentages around a little bit to get them into a fat loss position at the end of their open season or the next 4 to 6 weeks, I will do that and then explain the process to them. So that's the CrossFit athlete. I also have some wrestlers, which are a totally different beast because they have to make weight. So do Olympic lifters. With those clients, it is a very difficult equation, one that I like to have at least 12 to 16 weeks of practice with before we actually do our first competition. Sometimes it doesn't always happen. So if someone comes to me and they're only 4 or 5 pounds out of a meet, that's no problem. Take, for instance, I have a USA wrestler. He'll be going to the trials here in the next few months. And I've had him for about 10 weeks now. We've done 2 weight cuts in 10 weeks. He was eating only 1,400 calories when I got him. He wrestles at 142 flat. He's got a 2-pound leeway on most of his events. So I have to have him dialed in so tightly that I really didn't have an opportunity to push much food into his system before we did that first cut, which happened in 5 weeks. So it's very difficult when you get an athlete that has time limits on their weight. Because as you know, physical weight in fat loss is much different than losing water weight or mass, lean mass, or fiber, bulk from the stomach. There's a lot of different ways that you can see physical scale weight loss. So that's a very difficult client to work with. I usually like to have, again, 10 to 12 weeks at least where I can practice the weight cut. In this case, what I did with him is I pushed as much food as I possibly could in the 4 or 5 weeks, and I cut him for only 2 weeks, and he made weight with no problem. Where it was a big time struggle, he sits about 22 pounds over his wrestling weight in the off season, which is way too much. So now we'll be keeping him about 12 pounds over his wrestling weight, and I'll be comfortably adding food for him in his off season so that we can get him up about 800 to 1,000 more calories, and we have more to cut from, which will be a far easier cut than he has had in the past. So some of the other athletes are very, very particular as far as, weight cutting. The average athlete, let's say the average bodybuilder or gym goer, I get a lot of those people as well. So they make up about 10-15% of my athlete sector. Those are fairly easy people for me to get to. Maintenance level calories, usually most of them are fairly close. I would say within 200, 300 calories. Not very many of my bodybuilders greatly undereat because they're usually very focused on adding lean body mass. And most of the information out there now on the internet can be somewhat confusing, but some of these people are actually fairly educated in the sense that they know that they need to eat more to grow. However, we still have that athletic population, and primarily females, who come to me eating very little because they're still reading the old poor information that says, eat less, train more, you'll lose more weight, which is absolutely not going to work much past that first or second time that you diet. Okay. Because the body, again, accommodates for lower expenditure, or for lower intake, you probably will be adding more expenditure to the mix. A lot of people are all or nothing, so when they are in a deficit, they don't listen to their coach necessarily, they listen to themselves. They want everything faster, so they think if they do more cardio in a deficit, they're going to get to the finish line faster, which is absolutely not the case. It can really lead to a lot of issues as far as hormone insufficiency, slowing of the metabolism for a longer period. And then a lot of times they do not reverse diet out of that cutting phase properly. So I try really hard to get somebody up to close to maintenance level calories for their expenditure, and then work on the fat loss proponent. So that's it with the athletes. That covers about 100% of my span there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so we have, as far as goals that people come to you for, some of them want to improve athletic performance, and that involves a few variables that you just talked about. And then you also have a Gen Pop that comes in just wanting to lose weight, right?
Yep. And
so can you talk about, are they typically wanting to lose like 5 pounds, or is it someone that's more like 50, 70 pounds?
Yeah. So that's wonderful. We kind of broke this down into sections because this actually got me thinking about my population a lot. Most people that come to me have on average between about 15 to 20 pounds to lose. A lot of people come only needing to lose about 5 to 15 pounds, which is fairly easy. And I say that with respect to time frame. It's typically only, maybe 3 to 6 months that it would take to healthfully lose that 15 to 20 pounds or 10 to 15 pounds. People think 6 months is very slow. That's actually healthy. If you're looking at fat loss is very, very slow. So a lot of these fad diets, they come out, and obviously if you're removing 150 to 200 grams of carbs out of the diet the first 2 weeks, of course you're going to lose 10 pounds because 1 gram of carbohydrates holds 3 grams of water approximately. Carbohydrates are a carbon. Their job is holding water, right? So people go, oh my gosh, my friend lost 20 pounds on ketogenic diet or low carb diet. Well, yeah, a good majority of that is water in the beginning. And then they say, oh my gosh, but then after 2 months, he stalled or she stalled. So it's very important to understand that when you read information on fat loss, that fat loss is not fast. If you're losing body fat is a slow process, and it's something that needs to be done with extreme care so that you're not damaging the hormones and your internal system, your endocrine, the adrenals, etc. I really do need at least 3 to 6 months tangibly to even get people healthfully to 15 to 20 pounds of fat loss. That is an amazing success rate. To be honest, 90% of people that start with me will get there. The other 10 will not do it because it's not fast enough for them. They need to see the scale go down, and the scale is that terrible, terrible devil. So I typically have people try to take measurements, body measurements. That keeps that 90% going. They do the tape measuring. I've got the videos on my YouTube on how to tape measure your body. They do photo taking, photo collages, and put them side by side each week. Really, really awesome. Those two methods, in my opinion, are far better than scale weight loss, because I had a woman even tell me this morning, wow, when I was 130 back in 2012, I didn't look like 130 today. And I'm like, it's because you've added 6.5 pounds of lean muscle mass since 2012. That will look completely different than having 6.5 less pounds of lean muscle mass. You definitely will look, softer. So I think the scale is very difficult. If people are looking for, scale weight loss only, people get very excited when they have more weight to lose, obviously, because the more weight you have to lose, the more quickly you see it come off in the beginning. Typically, those people are either eating the least amount of food. It's astonishing that the people that are most overweight are typically eating the least amount of food. They're starving all day, typically, and binging at night before bed, or they start their eating window late in the afternoon and they finish late in the evening. They don't typically sleep very well, because how well would you sleep if you ate a majority of your food when you were about to go to bed? So we have a lot of different obstacles with those populations. So if people are here to lose 10 to 15 pounds, if they're an athlete or a non-athlete, what normally happens is they'll get about 10 pounds off, and they'll start listening to the education that I put out on a weekly basis, and they're like, you know what? I really want to see my body look differently. Now I need to implement strength training. I'm doing the cardio portion. It's not doing anything for me aesthetically. It might be helping me lose body fat a little bit more quickly in some cases, and in others, not at all. It's actually stalling you out longer. But to see physical changes, we have to put the body under tension, time under tension, TUT. And that needs to be done, and it's not going to change in 30 days. Changing the way your body looks aesthetically, which is typically the realization after fat loss. Once people get 15 pounds off or 20 pounds off, and sometimes it's 25 or 30 before they look at their body and say, gosh, I don't really have a lot of muscle mass. I think most of this was fat mass. And if you got your body index and your DEXA scan done before you started, and most of my clients do that, and now they're starting to do it in the beginning like I would like them to, taking the photos day one and doing the body index or the DEXA scan, bod pod, if you will. They're starting to see, wow, I'm coming down, but the scale's not coming down very fast, but I'm coming down and all my clothes are fitting better. That would be like the third or fourth check system. So for people who have more than, say, 25 pounds to lose, I would say a quarter of those people usually discover that they have an issue with either thyroid, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, TSH. Testosterone is a huge one, and it is a huge one in females. And I know that my population that's listening will agree with me. I've discovered this year probably 25 cases just in 2018, women who are low test and low thyroid. They are on levothyroxine, and lo and behold, I have them go get a full panel done with free and total testosterone, and they're so low, they're below a 10. Which is very, very low for a female, especially if you're in your 30s. And so you can see that some of these doctors are treating one thing but not treating the other, and that can be very difficult. So nonetheless, it can also play a huge factor in how slowly or how fast a person loses body fat. The metabolism is an interesting thing. And sorry about that, guys. Metabolism is an interesting thing. Everybody is a little bit different equation, so everybody's time frame is going to be a little bit different. And surely those people who have over 50 pounds to lose will probably be with me for more than a year. I did have a couple this last year lose 80 pounds total in less than 9 months. They adhered to the program 98%. I've never had that happen with a couple before. Usually it's close. It's between 90 and 95%. But adherence with any of these people, even the ones, especially the ones who only have 10 to 15 pounds to lose, adherence is really, really important. The longer you mess around, the longer it's going to take you to get from your starting point to your finish point.
Yeah, and that's super important, and that's something that is honestly not followed through with. I mean, right? That the adherence can really, or that's really going to dictate whether or not a person's going to be successful. If they don't follow through with it, it's not going to happen.
Right.
It doesn't matter what they do.
It's true, and that's why a lot of people ask, well, why is this flexible dieting thing so awesome and brilliant? Well, the reason it's awesome and brilliant is because, if you're doing a diet and you cannot see yourself doing that diet plan for longer than 6 months at a time, then it's not the right diet plan for you. It's not the right nutrition plan for you. I think that flexible dieting and macro tracking has made it so nice for the athletes to eat things that they still enjoy, especially around their training sessions. Because again, if you've ever tried to eat clean and go train, you don't really know how good you can be until you eat something that's not as clean. And again, I'm not a big proponent of people eating junk food because, again, I live a pretty healthy lifestyle, and I like to keep, a lot of my food high quality. In fact, most of it, because I've got Crohn's. So that has forced me, and with insulin resistance, it has also forced me to educate myself and my clients on a more efficient way to do it once they've got the system down. So that they don't have long-term issues with type 2 diabetes and, some of the haphazard eating that you can get into with some of these flexible dieting programs. I do not set parameters for my clients as far as what they should or could eat. Again, they're adults. I educate them and allow them to make their own decisions. I think a sustainable plan is one that, you can have a piece of chocolate if you want that one day, and then that's going to keep you on your plan for a couple days, and then you have a piece of pizza because that's what you're really craving, and that's going to keep you on your plan, and you budget for that, and it fits your macros. You want to go out for burgers on Saturday or Sunday, not both days, but one day. Again, that's part of the sustainability of being able to be a flexible dieter and to plan ahead for that. Use your coach, learn the system, adhere. For 35 meals, that 36th meal is not going to kill you just because it's not quote unquote clean, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about a number of things here, and I wanted to kind of go over some of the frequently asked questions, and you've already answered some.
Like 50.
Yeah. You've answered quite a bit of them. And I'll start with some of the ones that I have, and you can obviously add in yours.
Sure.
So one of the ones that I typically get is, just starting out, okay, well, how do I gain muscle and lose fat? And you talked about some of that where there's a combination of things. So there's making sure your hormones are optimized. There's making sure your nutrition's good. And then the strength training aspect, right? Cardio just simply isn't enough for any of that.
Cardio, if you're trying to add muscle mass and lean mass, cardio is really not a tool that you want to be using at that point. It's far easier to get somebody into a muscle building state if they take out a variable, and a variable would be cardio, it will get you there faster and keep you in a surplus. Most people don't need to be in a huge surplus to add muscle. In fact, a lot of people can still add muscle in a slight deficit if they're consistent enough with their training and they're consistent enough with their eating. So the undereaters are complaining, well, I never get to put on any muscle because blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you're under eating. That's why you're not putting on muscle. The strength training component is huge, but the other component that I think a lot of people don't look at is sleep. And, you know, if you talk to any of the bodybuilders and competitive bodybuilders for that matter, and natural bodybuilders, as they're getting leaner, their requirement for sleep is greater. The body is obviously lower body fat. To keep that muscle in a phase where you're losing body fat is the system. So we've got to be eating enough, we have to be sleeping enough, and we have to be training enough. So I tell my clients that are trying to add lean mass, your job is to eat, to sleep, and to train. And I don't mean cardio. I mean train with weights and progressive load. And the other thing is you know, people going on to Instagram and getting these little workouts from God knows who. Look at who you hired to do your training plan for you. If they're not a movement specialist, if they don't know what periodization means, I would hire somebody else, because if your trainer does not know what periodization means, you need a different trainer. And I don't say that to be mean. I only say that because in order for you to add muscle and to change your aesthetics, you are going to need somebody who knows what they're doing so that you don't get hurt and you're now not able to train for several weeks at a time. That is extremely frustrating. If you've talked to anybody who's been injured, an injury will put you out for sometimes 6 months to a year. So, and sometimes longer. So do it the right way, do it the smart way. If you're a beginner and you're looking to gain muscle mass and you want to stay very lean, then you need to adhere. You're kind of like the person who's cutting for stage. You want to adhere 90%. The other 10% for you in a muscle building phase is not going to matter, because you've got a lot more flexibility than some people. Now, if you don't care about adding a little bit of body fat in a muscle building phase, then you can be as flexible as probably a 60-40 or a 75-25 person who eats fairly clean and then has a lot of flexibility every single day, if they will, around their training sessions or whenever they feel like it. So that's the difference between lean gaining and gaining with a little bit more fluff.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the other questions I typically get is counting calories important? Can you talk a little bit about that? I know that's like, you know,
yes,
question that I'm sure
it's so important. Yeah, because it's so funny. I'll start coaching people, and about 2 months in, they're like, "Why do you keep saying energy balance?" And I'm like, "Well, what I mean is calorie balance. Your calories are energy, right? And you get that from your fats, your carbs, and your proteins." And so it's very, very important to know where those calories are coming from. If 50% of those calories are coming from fat and your goal is to lose body fat, you may be not hitting that bar because you're you're consuming too many fats. And again, maybe it's not much lower. Maybe you need to be at 40% or 35%. But you've got to, in order to make improvements, you have to track what you're doing. So counting calories does matter. You also need to know from your maintenance level calories roughly where you would be in a 300, 400 calorie deficit, right? How do you do that if you don't track? So I like people to really understand why I set them where I set them, where they came to me at, and people are mind boggled when they do the 7-day tracking. They're like, oh my gosh, 80% of my calories are coming from fat. And I'm like, see, you're not carb sensitive. You eat a lot of fat and you don't eat much protein and you eat moderate carbs. So it's eye-opening for people when they really break where their calories are coming from down into macronutrient value. And it makes it so much easier for me to do my job because I can explain thoroughly to them where they need to be, where they're at, and how long it's going to take me to get them to that perfect percentage for fats, carbs, and proteins. And again, there's a lot of gray area there. Some people can do it several different ways. Is there a right way or a wrong way? No, there's a better way for each person. And so some people electively like to take a little longer, eat more fat, get to their goal a little bit more slowly. And for other people, they can eat a lot of fat and get there just as fast as somebody who eats more carbs. So there's no right way to skin a cat. There's just a more appropriate way for the goal, I should say.
Yeah, no, and that's perfect. And one of the other questions is, what's the best diet to follow? And I know this usually just right now, it makes every nutritionist smile every time they get this question, right? So what's the best diet?
There's a lot of gurus out there, right?
Absolutely.
And I used to think that low carb was the way to go, and then I thought high fat was the way to go, and then I thought keto was the way to go, back in my 20s. And really until I started diving into the education and then reading other people's research, and just there's so much good data coming out on muscle protein synthesis. I would say, in the words that I'm going to preface this with, I'm not exact on how Layne Norton said this, but the most sustainable diet for you is the one that you should be on long term. I think that's really important. So it's something that, is easy for you to sustain, and maybe not easy, but, it takes some planning. It takes some required preparation, but it's doable. And you can still go to parties, and you can still go to functions, and you can still have fun, and you don't have to let everybody around you know that you're on a quote unquote diet. I would say that would be the diet plan for you. That would be the one that as a coach would make me most happy, is when I get your feedback and you say, this is sustainable because I am able to enjoy my time without being the workout Nazi in the gym. I'm able to maintain my weight and have some joy with desserts and going out to a meal, once a week or twice a week, if you will, once, the person reaches maintenance. And this is easy for me because I can go 4 months really hard, and then I can ease up for 2 months and have more flexibility. So I would say the best diet plan is one that you can maintain for longer than 6 months and have joy.
Yeah, and that's sound advice. You don't want to hate your life every day because you're having to, to diet, or I think it's best if you don't ever consider yourself dieting, right? That's
right.
When you
it's
don't
a plan.
When you're not saying, oh, I'm on a diet, it's that's what you want to go with.
Yeah, I never tell people I'm on a diet. I just tell them I have a special plan, and it's easy for me because I actually do have an excuse with the insulin resistance and the Crohn's disease, which go hand in hand, autoimmune. Obviously, it's easier for me to make excuses, but I always tell my macro trackers, we're not an elitist group, but when you go out to dinner, you don't have to tell everybody you're on a special plan. Sneak this in and sneak that in and see if people actually notice. Most of the time, they're so consumed with themselves, they don't even notice what you're doing. So, it's not as creepy or crazy as you think it is to plan ahead to not fail,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, and one of the other questions, or the biggest question that people have is, where do I start? And so part of that is going and using different, there's different tools you can use to start, right? And the tool that Kelli uses is flexible dieting or macro tracking. Mm-hmm. And so for those of you who don't know what that is or aren't familiar with it, it's essentially going and tracking the amount of protein, fat, and carbs you eat in a given day. And there's different ways to tailor that, and we're going to talk about that in the later next few episodes. But with macro tracking or flexible dieting, can you tell me a little bit about some of the pros to doing this, and then some of the cons that you might have to this?
And believe it or not, it's 50-50 because, again, this is not an easy system for people to learn. I can't tell you how hard it is for some people. They will try it on their own, and then they'll, sign up for coaching for a couple months, and then they just fly. It is difficult. So you've got to get a tracking system. I love MyFitnessPal because the database for MyFitnessPal, who's owned by Under Armour, again, I'm not sponsored by any of these people. I always have to say that. I'm actually not sponsored by anybody. I like MyFitnessPal for the sheer purpose of its functionality. It's very easy to use. I have YouTube videos on how to set it up. If you go to Kelli Michelle Fitness, you'll find all those YouTube videos. I actually have another video on how to get started with tracking your macros, finding your averages. So basically what you would do is you would load the app to your home computer or your cell phone. You would start to input everything that you eat on a daily basis. And most people are very routine eaters. They might go out to eat once or twice a week. and they would need to estimate those meals. A lot of the data is online for most of the restaurants that you'll go to, and you can get kind of a estimation of that meal. You can also hand input that into the MyFitnessPal database system. There's a lot of different macro tracking applications. You can pick whichever one you feel comfortable with. Again, I just love my clients to use MyFitnessPal because it's very, very easy to use, and the database is so extensive. So that's how I would start, is just everything that you eat, start putting it into the database. A lot of these databases have a barcode scanner for anything that you buy that's packaged. And then you would just use your food scale to portion it out. And if you aren't that sophisticated, just eyeball at first. Because the second part of macro tracking is that you do have to put everything on a food scale so that you can see what 6 ounces of protein looks like. That way, when you go out to eat, you know approximately what this thing looks like eyeballed, because it's amazing how much you fool yourself when you don't even know what 3 ounces is, 6 ounces is, 100 grams of potato. I ask people, do you know the difference between grams and ounces? They're like, no. I'm like, well, that's interesting because you've been measuring things in grams, and your conversions from grams to ounces are not the same. So you want to make sure that if you're measuring grams, on your carbs and your fat, that you essentially move over to that with your proteins, if you will, because it's more accurate. And you get more. You can have more. And so people are like, wow, grams is so precise. And I'm like, yes, it is. But for the time being, I have people stick with ounces because a lot of times that's what we've been measuring in or they've been estimating in. So we'll keep that until they're comfortable with it, and then we progress. So where do we run into some pitfalls with macro tracking? Some people find that they're too OCD and they have added another obsession to their list of obsessions. Yeah. And they become overly calculated with everything, and they become a perfectionist with tracking macros. That is one of the areas where usually I can see that happening right away, and I'll have them pump the brakes and implement a little bit less structure in those areas. And some people are just very structured like that, and they find that it's just too overwhelming for them to do macro tracking for longer than, say, 3 months at a time. And they'll take little, what I would call, quote unquote, diet breaks, where they'll still have their macro goals, but they'll just not use the scale to weigh all of their food. Maybe they'll eat 200 or 300 calories more than what they were eating when they were really structured dieting. And that's kind of the pretense of a diet break, is, giving someone a little bit more food, a little more flexibility for a certain specified time frame, and then they can get back on that tracking again. I like for people to embrace this as a lifestyle. So I really don't want them to be so strict and structured during those 2 or 3 months. I want them to be flexible throughout if they can be. Obviously, if the person's going on stage to be critiqued in front of judges, that's going to be a very different situation, one that I don't personally take on anymore. I don't diet fitness competitors anymore because flexible dieting is it loses its luster with people that have to look a certain way to go on stage at, sub 2% body fat. Flexible dieting, I don't think it can be as flexible and isn't as flexible when you're 1,000 calories under what you were eating when you started flexible dieting. So it can be a little difficult for some people because of the learning process. So I would say this to you: do one step at a time. I think anyone can be successful with flexible dieting if they are very patient with themselves and they're patient with the process. You got to think about it like this. It didn't take you 30 days to learn your job, right? It didn't take you 30 days to become a good husband or wife. It didn't take you 30 days to be a good student. So you've got to give something a reasonable time frame for learning. Take it one step at a time. Start to learn how to add your food to MyFitnessPal first, and then work on your water the next week. And then take a look at your fiber the next week and see if your fiber is adequate. And again, we've got some fiber ratios. They're actually, the percentages of fiber intake on MyFitnessPal are very good. They're standard, FDA standard. So you can start there. And then, if you feel like you need more help because you can't find the necessary information online, I will tell you there is a system online called Avatar Nutrition, one of the best systems I feel you can buy into if you don't need personal coaching. A lot of people need personal one-on-one coaching to learn the system, but some people are able to do the online system and get their numbers populated and hit them perfectly. I would say you're in the 5% group if you can do that, but Avatar Nutrition is awesome. They are really, really good at doing the weekly adjustments for you. They are Gen Pop specific, so pretty much anyone can go on to avatarnutrition.com and get a generic macro designation, a place to start. And you can also put in your goal, and it will tailor your macronutrient needs towards your goal. Again, I do get some people from Avatar Nutrition that need a little more personal coaching. And that's where I would say, if you know that you're one of those people, you might want to save yourself the headache and feeling like you failed at macro tracking and just hire a coach to do that.
Yeah, and that's sound advice. So to summarize, we're getting towards the end of our episode here. So to summarize a few things that we've gone over, when you're looking at goals as far as nutrition, whether it's athletic performance, losing a little bit of weight, and then going further into that, gaining muscle, losing fat, etc., there's a few things to consider. So nutrition obviously is a big one. Also hormone optimization, strength training, and then sleep are the other factors to consider. There's obviously different ways to go about following nutrition. At the end of the day, the best diet for you or the best nutrition for you is going to be one that's sustainable, that you don't feel like you're having to work on, and that's making sure that you're healthy. And then one of the tools that Kelli uses is flexible dieting or macro tracking, and that involves going and counting out your fats, carbs, and proteins and checking that. And the reason she uses this is because she's found it sustainable. It can become a lifestyle very easily. The con to it is that you can get OCD with it.
Yes.
And, so you do need to be careful with that part. But she makes sure that doesn't happen to you if you work with her.
Yeah, for sure. Because I have to pump the brakes on a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good they're committed, but you don't have to be an A+ student every week.
Yeah, exactly. And she offered great advice on, a lot of people have the mentality of, I'm going to go all in and give it 100%, and sometimes that works, and other times you need to remember it does take time to learn these things. Mm-hmm. I love the analogy you gave about, it didn't take you, a week to be a good husband or a better student or better at your job, whatever. It took you some time to get there. Mm-hmm. So start slow. You can just start by doing the MyFitnessPal tracking, and then kind of go from there. Just to give you an idea of the next few episodes we have coming up, we're going to be talking about common mistakes in nutrition and what people do in dieting and how to fix those. We're going to talk about using macro tracking for athletic performance, using macro tracking for weight loss, and then also nutrition and hormones and how those two kind of go hand in hand with each other. So we'll go ahead and end today's episode. So thank you, Kelli, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'm excited to come back.
Yeah, and we'll...
So nerdy.
Yeah, I love this stuff.
I know.
And yeah, we'll be back with the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.